Welcome into Table Talk. I'm Brian Kell. We have someone with us today that's no stranger to Channel 6 and a lot of the big announcements that we've had over the years. In this kind of setting, she is new. It's her first time at the virtual table here on Table Talk. It is CEO of Ntca and the Rural Broadband Association, the queen of cooperatives, Ms. Shirley Bloomfield. Shirley, thanks so much for joining us on Table Talk.
Brian, it is simply a delight to be with you today and to get a chance to talk about some of these issues that you and I have been working on so hard over the course of time. And frankly, I just want to stop and commend Ben Lomond Connect for all that you are doing in your community to continue to serve through what have been challenging times.
Well, we thank you because you're all over the place, and it is Cooperative Month, and so it made perfect sense to talk with the image and the face really of so many cooperatives across this nation. Where do we find you at today? Because you're all over the place. Where is this home finally on a Friday?
This is home on a Friday before I do a 3-city tour next week, so it is perfect timing. But you know, it's good to be busy because in part, so many people want to talk about rural broadband, what folks like Ben Lomond are up to, why it's important to keep Americans connected. So honestly, I can't complain. It's a great story to tell, and I'm privileged to be able to tell it.
Well, let's jump in because there's a lot happening that you can help fill in our viewers and cooperative members and customers on what you're seeing and hearing from across the nation. But first of all, I guess let's start at the beginning in some ways, in that the cooperative model was formed many decades ago. It still continues to be a very viable model. Can you talk about just what it means to represent the cooperatives and just what people are saying about cooperatives in general, like Ben Lomond Connect?
So cooperatives are such an interesting business model that really started out of need, particularly, and I think we saw a lot of this in rural communities where folks didn't have the scope and scale, so they banded together to bring services, whether it was telephone service years ago, whether it was power service, whether it was food cooperatives. The idea that folks get together and actually work towards a common goal was something that was wildly impactful years ago. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I find so special about telephone cooperatives, now telecommunications cooperatives, now broadband cooperatives, is that you all were formed at a time when the large nationwide carriers made a very conscious decision not to come in and to provide service into some of these rural communities. So really, literally what happened is folks rose up, said, let's organize, let's figure out a way to serve ourselves, and started Ben Lomond. You all have been a cooperative in existence for 67 years. And what a successful model that you listen to the folks you serve, because the folks you serve are the owners of the company. And so that whole passion behind the service you provide, how far out you deploy those services, how you think about being innovative, because the folks, again, that you are working towards are not people in some far off parts of the United States, but they're the people that you live with and that you work around, and they're part of your community. You see at the grocery store, you see at the post office. So that spirit of service is so unique in a cooperative movement. And also the idea that you are so mindful of plugging back your resources right back into new services. And we've seen that with cooperatives like Ben Lomond, where you are constantly building, expanding your network, extending your network, providing more and more advanced future-proof technologies, because that is your commitment to your owners and to your customers.
Well, and Shirley, you mentioned it, 67 years for Ben Lomond Connect. Actually, next year will mark 70 years since I think the application was granted. So we're starting to hit some really big numbers with Ben Lomond, and thanks to our customers and members, we're continuing to be able to serve. So that's great news for not only us but also all the cooperatives out there. You mentioned the pandemic. You mentioned moving through that. I think before we started this. I guess with us still in with the remnants of this still going on and the Delta variant and things of that nature, can you talk a little bit about what you have learned personally, and then also just from a business standpoint and representing cooperatives and working and representing NTCA on what the pandemic has meant for you and the cooperatives across the nation?
So I will start off personally with just sharing that I think I have a whole new appreciation for connecting with family and loved ones, and how much I've taken that for granted when the idea of being able to visit with somebody, to be able to hug people I love, was taken away. And it's given me a whole new sense of appreciation. And I hope I don't lose that. But on the business front, I have to say, Brian, that we have been talking about how important broadband cooperatives, telecommunication cooperatives are to their community and to the service they provide, how important it is to keep Americans connected. If we haven't learned a lesson over the course of the last 20 months, then shame on us as a country, because connectivity and the services you provide have never been more critical to people. When we look at things like the use of telemedicine going up 125% in the heart of the pandemic, when people were afraid to go to the doctor's office but knew they needed care, that was wildly significant. When across the country, we think about the fact that at the onset of the pandemic, there were at least 14 million school children across the country without any connectivity or access, and yet they were being sent home and classes were conducted, and we had that high a number of our American children that were not able to connect and keep up, except for going to a Taco Bell parking lot. When we think about all of the different things in terms of the ability for small businesses to not shutter their doors, the fact that we are doing even this discussion virtually, right? The ability for offices to stay connected. I loved Ben Lomond had a article in one of your magazines where right in the start of the pandemic, you did an education spread to your consumers about the importance of video conferencing. And I thought spot on to really educate everybody and all of us on how to use these tools to stay connected at a time when it's a challenge. So there have been a lot of lessons learned, but the one epiphany I think has really been that policymakers now, for as long as we have been talking about how important it is the work that you are doing, they kind of had that like V8 moment, like, oh, now I get it. Yes, broadband is important. Everybody needs to have connectivity. So that has actually made it's made our job easier. We've had to continue to keep policymakers targeted, but it's kicked open that door to talk about what will it take to ensure all Americans are connected, and how do we sustain the networks that have been built, and how do we truly reach those who are still waiting for connectivity, in part because they're served by large carriers who've really chosen not to make those investments. So there's a lot of work to be done, but there's a lot of momentum underneath our wings right now.
Well, and speaking of momentum and also kind of those V8 moments, I should have had fiber kind of moments. It's kind of translated into state and federal focus, high intense focus that you've been a part of, into deployment of fiber. And we've seen that in grants. We've seen, on so many different levels. Talk about that focus. Talk about just what fiber is meaning to policymakers right now.
So that has been the most interesting part of some of this, is that we've been talking about the power of fiber for a long time. Fiber technology, it is future-proof, meaning that even as your consumers' capacity grow, even as an individual consumer's needs grow, the ability for Ben Lomond to match those needs instantaneously without new construction, without added costs, is powerful. The ability to do things like sit at the kitchen counter on your VPN while your two kids are doing a Zoom class and having no disruptions and having the ability to do that with reliable services is pretty profound. But in the past, when we would talk about fiber technology, people would say, oh, that's just gold plating. That's just, people don't need those kind of services. Well, we have found that not only do people need that speed, their demand and their hunger for that bandwidth continues to grow exponentially. The need to be able to upload as quickly as you're downloading. Those trends are not going to be put back in the bottle. Those are things that are here to stay. So for anybody who wants to game, to stream, to use their VPN, to have 4 people in their households connected, there's no other way to go. So I do feel really good about the fact that we've been able to talk to policymakers, particularly through our Fiber Delivers campaign, to talk about what fiber brings. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't others in the industry who spend a lot of time and effort basically saying, oh, you know what, fixed wireless is good enough. It's good enough. And that's the thing we've been working really hard to combat, is that whole sense that rural consumers don't deserve the same services that those in urban America have access to. And we've got to make sure that, we kind of cut that discussion from the start. But to your earlier question about resources, we have seen to date about $15 billion come down through the pipeline, whether it's been through the CARES Act or the American Recovery Act, that has been able to go directly to building broadband. Now, obviously, we've been working really hard to craft how that gets done. Things like a nod to the fact that cooperatives are a great business model, a nod to the fact that partnerships can really help move the ball for those people who are unconnected, and also making sure that speeds like fiber are given preference, and that we do a better job of mapping. So as we look at these very valuable federal resources that are coming on down through the states, that we're putting money where money needs to go, and that we're coordinating it. So whether you've got funding coming from the Department of Agriculture, or coming from Ntca, or coming from your state governor's office, that all of that gets coordinated so we can make the best use of these resources. Now, I say that in that that's one bucket. The second bucket that we are, fingers crossed, waiting for is if Congress can actually coordinate themselves and pass the infrastructure initiative. That's going to be really important, because that will have $42 billion just for building networks. I look at, Ben Lohman, you've connected folks all across your region. I think, what are the opportunities for a cooperative like yours to actually extend service to those who have yet to be served, but maybe are not yet a member of Ben Lomond Cooperative? So there's a lot we can do with that. And the other piece of the infrastructure initiative that I think is really important is it also addresses affordability, because we can talk all we want about building broadband networks, but if consumers can't afford it, then it doesn't really matter. So I really like the 1-2 punch. So we are very hopeful that before the end of this year, that initiative will pass, and we'll start to get to work on what those rules and regulations will look like.
We're talking with CEO of Ntca, the Rural Broadband Association's Shirley Bloomfield. Shirley, I don't think it's a coincidence that, speaking of moving through the pandemic and all the focus, that we are seeing more and more on the state level and on the national level efforts in which fiber, smart rural in Tennessee, having the governor be able to pronounce that on a special day. I think that was a couple of weeks ago. Finding you in your words in publications and in front of committees. It's a multi-prong focus, I guess, it's going on between all representatives of fiber broadband.
Absolutely. And you know what? I think this is one of those times where it's going to take a village, right? It's going to take, I just have the luxury of being able to tell your stories. I get to work with federal policymakers and share the great things that you are doing, and to educate them on what is a smart rural community and how you all are using that broadband to build better lives for the people in your communities. And you all are doing the work on the ground. But I think one of the things that I think is really important is that the reason I love Ntca members is you just put your head down and you do good work. You don't pop it up as often as you probably should to tell people the good work that you are doing. But when I look at Ben Lomond and I think about the work that you did as soon as the pandemic hit, you put free Wi-Fi spots all over your service territory. You worked with your schools to make sure that kids were connected. You opened, with partnership with our Foundation for Rural Service, a virtual living room that was providing telemedicine benefits to the veterans in your community. Those are things that resonate, and those are things that tell the story of what is really going on when you get community-based providers really stepping up to make sure their communities are vibrant and have a role into the future.
Talk about, I know education is very important to you. I mean, not only with the folks that, you know, in the stories you tell and trying to educate policymakers or just folks across the nation as to what the Rural Broadband Association does, but talk about how important it is: education, information, advocacy, just so that generations, I guess, know the importance of the roles that Ntca and I guess fiber broadband can play.
So I will say that trade associations are a strange creature. If you don't really work with them, you don't really understand what the purpose is. What we are able to do, we've got 850 community-based providers across the country, all of the telephone cooperatives, and then those entities that are owned and based within a community. And what we do is we provide services that nobody could provide on their own. The ability to speak with one voice before public policymakers, the ability to produce intellectual capital, like white papers talking about digital inclusion and how important it is, what is going on the precision agriculture front. Those are the kinds of things that we can use our scope and scale to share with those who actually need to hear those stories. The other thing that we spend a lot of time doing, you know, again, a cooperative, your board of directors are essentially volunteers from the community who get elected to represent the communities they serve. But, you know, they're not worrying about broadband technology on a daily or even a weekly basis. So one of the voids that we hope that we're filling is educating those directors. What are the trends? What is the technology? What are best practices? What are good governance things? What are the latest things that they should be thinking about regarding cybersecurity? So we hope that we fill that void where we can kind of plug in and help all of these companies across the country that, again, couldn't do this on their own, do this in kind of an aggregated area. So we have been extremely lucky to be able to do the work that we do. And again, one of the things I would share that's important on the advocacy front is it is very easy for Congress to ignore individual requests that come into their office. The ability for us to say, here we are, 850 companies across the country, covering 35% of the United States landmass. Let us tell you why some of the things that are important to our member companies need to be incorporated. That allows us to have a very, very different reach, and it really tells a very different story. So we're very bullish about what trade associations do. We're very bullish about what Ntca is up to. Again, using us as a national platform to share things that we're seeing coming down the pike with all of our member companies.
Over the years, speaking of education, over the years, we've had quite a few students that have been able to go to Washington, D.C. through FRS, the Foundation for Rural Services. And I know that they have benefited greatly from being able to talk to others from Alaska and from California and just be able to share experiences and even make big friends, especially while they're there. And so I think that as somebody who's served as a chaperone for that before, that's such a great thing that happens every year up at DC. Of course, it couldn't last year or the past couple of years, I guess.
We're ready to open our applications for 2022, and we
Yes.
have plans to move forward. And can I just thank you for being a chaperone? Because people may think that's a cushy gig. Let's go out to DC with a high school student. You are monitoring a group of 100 high school students, many of whom have never gotten on an airplane before. To your point, are making friends from all over the country, and getting on a bus first thing in the morning and going to the Capitol, going to the FCC, going to see some of the very historic sites here in Washington, D.C. I give you credit because you've got to be exhausted by the end of the day, and those kids are just getting started.
Well, it's fun. I mean, while it can be a lot of getting around and everything, so much knowledge there, and we've been lucky to have a lot of folks here at Ben Lomond to be able to go through that and more over the years to come, hopefully too. But special thanks to FRS for what they provide for kids in our communities. Yesterday, when me and you were going back and forth by emails, or earlier this week, you mentioned a term that I thought was really interesting, and that's a rural renaissance. When you say rural renaissance, talk about what that means to you and what you're seeing across the nation when it comes down to rural communities rising up.
So I think that we had a moment in time, Brian, during the start of the pandemic when people really started looking around and saying, do I really need or want to live in this high density community? Do I really want to have an hour-long commute every morning to the office and then repeat it on the way back again? Because we learned that broadband allowed us to do so many things remotely. So we really talked about the attractiveness of rural America, the quality of life, the ability to create relationships within your community, a lot of things that are lost in urban areas. Here in my own community in Arlington, Virginia, I don't know most of my neighbors. Everybody gets in their car and goes to work first thing in the morning. So we saw a little bit of a migration out to rural America as soon as the pandemic hit. And we started thinking about what is the ecosystem that will be really critical for a rural renaissance, and looking at things like, what can you do for small businesses? What can you do in terms of telemedicine? Because honestly, those are kind of access to services that people are afraid to leave an urban area for. What is the ability to connect on the education front? And how can we use broadband to improve the quality of life? So we really started talking about, are there ways for rural America to sell itself a little bit better? I look at Ben Lomond and you all having a smart rural community designation. And we've been working, for example, with site selection committees for corporations and manufacturing plants to say, you know what? You've got a great workforce in these rural communities. You've got connectivity to beat connectivity anywhere else in the country. And you can have an employee base that will be happy with their quality of life. So thinking through some of that, and it'll be interesting to see. I think we're still kind of looking and seeing what will happen there. We did see a little bit about migration now as offices and things are opening back up. It'll be a question mark, but I look at operations like Ntca. We will be forever hybrid. There are a lot of places that will be forever remote. So how can rural communities capitalize on that? How can they showcase the broadband they have? One of the things we've been doing a lot of work with is the realtors. And we've been finding across the country that if you have fiber connectivity to your home, that increases your home value by about 4%. How do we, again, share that? Yeah, look at rural America, because you may have this image of rural America being unserved, but if you're looking in the areas served by cooperatives, you're going to get Class A service. And I contend you're going to get better service than you get a lot of these urban areas. I know exactly when my large carrier throttles some of my service every time of day. So those are things that we're really trying to elevate. And I'll just share a really quick story. Is we had at the start of the pandemic, one of our cooperatives in Kentucky was profiled by the New Yorker magazine, and the fact that they've got a gig service, they've got one stoplight. And recently, the general manager of that cooperative called me and said he ran into a couple in the post office who was looking for where to find the local telephone cooperative, because they had just moved from New York City, because they'd read this New Yorker article that there's a gig here in the beautiful Appalachian Mountains of Kentucky, and they got in the car and they said, we're moving the 2 kids. Our jobs are remote forever. Here we go. And those are the kind of things that I think, how can we amplify that? How can we get some momentum and some traction? Because I do think rural America is a hidden gem to a large number of folks in this country.
I think what you're kind of saying is hashtag rural is cool. I think is maybe what you're alluding to. Maybe.
I said it the long way. You just said it the short way.
So yeah, it's backwards because of the screen and everything. But yeah, definitely has been a hashtag that's been around for quite some time that we still use in the industry as far as hashtag rural is cool. Shirley, how can folks, I have a feeling that part of your answer could be when I say, how can people find out more about NTCA? You might go, well, keep up with Ben Lomond, because keeping up with Ben Lomond is kind of keeping up with NTCA, hopefully. But if people are curious to learn more about NTCA and what all's happening with the organization, how can they find you?
I appreciate your asking. So if they don't come directly to Ben Lomond, then I would say we've got a very robust website, www.ntca.org. That will land you in a place where you can say, I want to see FCC filings, or I want to see white papers that talk about telemedicine initiatives, or I would like to see a little bit more about what this Foundation for Rural Service is actually doing out in these communities and what kind of scholarships and community grants that they're offering. We have a robust amount of information on that website, and I'd certainly encourage anybody to go ahead and check it out. And if you really need more, just ping me. Brian knows where to find me.
We can do it. That's for sure. Well, I called her the queen of cooperatives at the start. I'll end it by saying the queen of broadband. She is the CEO of NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association, Shirley Bloomfield. Shirley, on behalf of Ben Lomond Connect, CEO Greg Smart, our board of directors, our employees, and also our members and customers that you're representing, thank you for the great work that you do.
Brian, thank you for the great work that you do. And I will just also have to share that Ben Lomond has a very special place in my heart. When I started in this industry over 30 years ago, it was the very first cooperative I ever had the opportunity to visit. So you know what? It's still here.
Well, we're gonna have to get you back when you're in the area, you know, whether you're flying over or driving through and everything like that. And then who knows, maybe for that 70th annual meeting, maybe we can get you down here for something like that too.
I'd love to come visit.
Shirley, thank you so much for joining us on Table Talk today.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, for Shirley Bloomfield, we bid you adieu for this edition of Table Talk, but we'll catch you at this table or virtual table again next time here on BLTV Channel 6 with Table Talk.